The museum was silent, the kind of silence that feels alive, as if the walls remember every story ever told. When 16-year-old Amara brushed the dust off an old display case, she wasn't expecting to see her own last name engraved on a rusted metal tag, a slave tag dated 1823. Her heart stopped. The guide's voice faded, the crowd disappeared, and all she could hear was the faint echo of chains and waves, as if someone, somewhere, was calling her name. That night, Amara couldn't sleep, because she knew one thing for sure: that tag was not just an artifact. It was an invitation to a buried truth her family had long been too afraid to uncover. The morning sun spilled through the yellow curtains of Amara's small bedroom, touching the posters of jazz legends and freedom marchers on her wall. She had spent the whole week waiting for this day, the school trip to the National History Museum of African Heritage in Charleston. It wasn't just another school outing for her. Amara had always been curious about where she came from, not just the names on a family tree, but the souls behind them. Her grandmother, Miss Evelyn, often spoke in riddles whenever Amara asked about their ancestors. Some things, she would whisper, are better left where they're buried. But Amara never understood that. She wanted to unbury them. At 16, she had grown used to being the curious one, the girl who questioned everything, from her history books to her teachers. Her best friend Leah teased her for it all the time. "Girl, you don't rest," Leah would laugh. "You'd turn over your own grave just to check who's inside." Amara always replied with the same grin. "Maybe I would, if it meant finding the truth." That morning, as she buttoned up her denim jacket and tied her curls into a bun, she didn't know this trip would do exactly that. Turn over graves she never meant to disturb. The bus was loud with laughter, gossip and music from Bluetooth speakers. But Amara sat by the window, her notebook open, jotting down questions she wanted to ask the museum curator. Her teachers always called her the historian in training. Outside, the old streets of Charleston passed like fading film reels, cobblestones, iron gates, and mansions built from blood and sweat. Amara felt something tighten in her chest. She whispered quietly, "How many stories are buried here?" When they reached the museum, she was the first to step off the bus. The building rose like a monument to memory, red brick walls lined with murals of African kings, freedom fighters, and the nameless who crossed oceans in chains. A tall woman greeted them, Dr. Celeste Morgan, the museum's chief historian. Her deep voice carried both authority and empathy. "Welcome," she said, "to the House of Voices. Everything you see here once belonged to someone who refused to be forgotten." Those words hit Amara harder than she expected. Inside the museum, the air was cool and heavy with time. Each room was a chapter of pain and resilience. There were chains displayed under glass, journals written by enslaved women, and faded maps tracing the ships that carried millions into darkness. Leah clung to Amara's arm, whispering, "This is so creepy." But Amara felt something else, a strange pull, as if her heartbeat matched the rhythm of the museum itself. In the third exhibit, they reached a small section titled Names That Survived. Dr. Morgan explained, "When families were torn apart, the enslaved often carried one thing, their names, passed in secret through generations." Amara's gaze fell on a dusty wooden case tucked in the corner. Inside, dozens of rusted tags, identification tokens given to enslaved people in the 1800s, lay in rows, each one engraved with a number, a location, and a name. Her eyes skimmed lazily over the names: James, Elijah, Rose, until one word froze her in place. "Amara," she blinked hard. Maybe she was imagining it, but no, the metal tag clearly read Amara, Charleston, 1823. Her breath caught. Her classmates walked ahead, but she couldn't move. The tag was small, no bigger than her palm, yet it carried a weight that crushed her chest. "Miss Morgan," she called out softly, "this tag, who did it belong to?" The curator walked over, peered through the glass, and frowned. "Ah, yes, that one's been here for years. Records say it belonged to a housemaid named Amara. She disappeared before the Civil War. No one knows how or why." Amara's throat went dry. "Was she from here?" "Born in Charleston," Dr. Morgan replied. She worked for a wealthy family on King Street. "That's all we have on file," Amara whispered. "That's my name." The curator smiled politely. Quite a coincidence. But to Amara, it didn't feel like coincidence at all. It felt like calling, back home. That night, back in her room, she couldn't shake it. She Googled Amara Charleston 1823, but found nothing. Still, something deep inside her knew there was a connection. She stared at her grandmother's old family photo on the wall. Black and white, faces lined with strength. She called her grandmother. "Grandma, did we ever have someone named Amara in our family history?" Silence. "Why are you asking that, child?" Her grandmother's voice finally said, low and cautious. "I saw her name today. In the museum, on a slave tag. Same spelling, same city," Miss Evelyn exhaled sharply. "Listen to me carefully, baby. You let the past rest, you hear me? Some stories aren't meant to be found. But Grandma, promise me, Amara." Her grandmother hung up. That night, as the wind rattled the window, Amara dreamed of the museum, of footsteps echoing in empty halls, and of a woman in a torn white dress whispering through the glass, "Find me." The next morning, Amara woke to the sound of rain tapping against her window. It wasn't the gentle kind. It was steady, rhythmic, almost deliberate, like fingers knocking on glass. Her dreams had been filled with the image of that old tag, its rusty letters glowing like embers in the dark. She sat up, her mind still echoing with her grandmother's warning. Some stories aren't meant to be found, but how could she stop now? Something deep in her soul told her this wasn't coincidence. It was connection. It was blood calling to blood. The search begins at school. Amara couldn't focus. Every subject, every conversation blurred around her. By lunchtime, she found herself scrolling through old archives on her phone, looking for any trace of the name Amara tied to Charleston in the early 1800s. Most of what she found were vague census records and ship manifests. But one small detail made her pause. A record from 1823 mentioning Amara, servant of the Whitmore family, Charleston Parish. The Whitmores were known for their wealth, their grand estate, and their brutal reputation in historical letters she'd once read. Amara felt a chill run through her. She wrote the name down and decided that after school, she'd go back to the museum, return to the museum. The sky was gray by the time she reached the museum steps. The building seemed different in the rain, quieter, heavier. The large glass doors reflected her face back at her, but behind that reflection, she swore she saw something. The faint outline of another woman standing just beyond the threshold. When she blinked, it was gone. Inside, Dr. Celeste Morgan looked surprised to see her. "Back so soon?" she asked, setting down a stack of papers. Amara hesitated, then said, "I wanted to ask about the Whitmore family. You mentioned the slave tag belonged to one of their servants. Do you have anything else?" The curator studied her for a long moment before replying. "Those records are incomplete. Most of them burned in a fire during the war." "But why the sudden interest?" Amara bit her lip. "Because I think she might be related to me." Dr. Morgan's expression softened. "Come with me." The basement archive. The curator led Amara through a locked door behind the main exhibits. A staircase spiraled downward into a dimly lit archive room lined with boxes, folders, and artifacts that hadn't been displayed in decades. The air was thick with dust and silence. "This," Dr. Morgan said, "is where the forgotten stories live." They found a small box labeled Whitmore Estate, Personal Records. Inside were fragments, an old letter, a photograph, and a faded inventory sheet. Amara's hands trembled as she picked up a letter written in flowing cursive. The ink was barely legible, but a name stood clear. "To my dearest Amara, may freedom find you even if I could not." Her breath caught. The letter was signed with the initials E.W. "Who's E.W.?" she asked. Dr. Morgan flipped through a book. "Eleanor Whitmore, the mistress of the household. Strange. It appears she helped some enslaved people escape through the Underground Railroad." "So, she and Amara? Maybe allies," Dr. Morgan said. "Or friends. But this is delicate history, child. People don't always want these truths told." Strange occurrences that night. Amara couldn't stop thinking about the letter. She placed a printed copy on her nightstand. Around midnight, the air in her room shifted. Cooler, sharper. Her lamp flickered once, then twice, and a faint scent of sea salt filled the air. She sat up. On her desk, the printed letter began to ripple, as if touched by invisible wind, and faintly, barely audible, she heard a woman's voice whisper, "Find the river." Amara froze. The room fell silent again. She jumped out of bed, heart pounding. Grabbing her phone, she quickly searched Whitmore Estate, Charleston River. The first result showed a plantation near the Ashley River, now abandoned. Marked as private property, something in her heart whispered, "That's where she wants me to go." The hidden plantation 2 days later, Amara convinced Leah to go with her. "You want to break into a plantation?" Leah said, half horrified. "Not break in," Amara insisted. "Just visit." For research, they took Leah's brother's car and drove for an hour out of the city. The landscape shifted from urban roads to open marshland and fields, the kind that seemed to hum with memories. When they reached the old gate, it was half buried in vines. A rusted sign read, "Whitmore Plantation, established 1791. No entry." The main house was in ruins, its columns cracked, its windows boarded. But something about it felt alive, as if it had been waiting. Inside, dust coated everything. The air smelled of age and salt. Amara walked slowly, her flashlight cutting through the darkness. When they reached the old gate, it was half buried in vines. A rusted sign read, "Whitmore Plantation, established 1791. No entry." The main house was in ruins, its columns cracked, its windows boarded. But something about it felt alive, as if it had been waiting. Inside, dust coated everything. The air smelled of age and salt. Amara walked slowly, her flashlight cutting through the darkness. In what must have been the main hall, she noticed a faint engraving on the wall beneath layers of grime, initials carved deep into the plaster, A.W. 1823, her knees went weak. "She was here," she whispered. The whisper room. They wandered deeper until they reached a small stone room at the back of the house, a cellar of some kind. The door creaked open, revealing a single iron ring bolted to the floor. Chains hung loose beside it. Leah stepped back, shivering. "This is awful." Amara's eyes filled with tears. She knelt, touching the floor where faint scratches formed what looked like words. She shone the flashlight closer. "River. Safe." The same word the voice whispered. A gust of cold air swept through the room, though there were no open windows. Leah gasped, "Let's go, now!" But Amara couldn't move. The air around her felt thick, electric. And then, in the beam of her flashlight, she saw it. The faint outline of a woman standing at the far end of the cellar. A woman in a torn white dress, her eyes calm but full of sorrow. Amara's breath caught. "Are you her?" The figure tilted her head slightly. Then, just as the flashlight flickered again, she was gone. Amara dropped the light. She was right there. Leah was trembling. "We need to go." But Amara picked up the tag she had brought, a copy she'd printed from the museum display, and placed it on the ground where the apparition stood. "I'm going to find you," she whispered. "I promise." The grandmother's confession. When Amara got home that evening, her grandmother was waiting, her face pale, her hands shaking. "I told you not to go digging," Miss Evelyn said quietly. Amara froze. "How did you know? You think I wouldn't feel it?" Her grandmother's voice cracked. "That house, that name, and they belong to us. That woman you saw, she's our blood." Amara's world tilted. "You knew?" Miss Evelyn nodded, tears in her eyes. "My mother used to whisper the story when I was little, about the first Amara, the woman who led 3 families to freedom through the river. They said she disappeared after the last escape. The tag in that museum. It's the only proof she ever lived," Amara whispered. "Why didn't you ever tell me?" Her grandmother looked away, because the story didn't end in peace. "The Whitmores found out. Everyone who helped her vanished. We survived by keeping her name in silence. But you..." She reached out, gripping Amara's hand. "You've awakened her spirit, and she won't rest until her truth is told." The decision that night, Amara sat by her window, rain pouring outside, her grandmother's words echoing in her mind. The ghostly whisper, the letter, the carvings. They were all pieces of the same puzzle. She opened her notebook and wrote, "Project, the lost Amara, the woman who walked across water." If her ancestor had been erased, then Amara would write her back into history, not with whispers, but with words, art, and truth. The next morning, she returned to the museum with a determination that silenced even Dr. Morgan. "I want to research her fully," she said. "Every record, every scrap of paper you have." The curator watched her for a long moment, then smiled faintly. "I think she's been waiting for you." As Amara walked into the archive room again, the air seemed to hum, not with fear, but with gratitude. Somewhere beyond time, the first Amara smiled, and for the first time, the girl who found her name in a museum didn't feel like a visitor to history. She felt like its continuation. The following weeks consumed Amara. Every day after school, she returned to the museum, sifting through piles of records and letters in the archives. Dr. Morgan had started to trust her, or perhaps had sensed something in her persistence that reminded her of the very women whose stories had been buried by history. Amara discovered that the Whitmore plantation wasn't merely a house. It was once a crossroads for the Underground Railroad. Hidden tunnels beneath the estate connected to the Ashley River, which escaped slaves used as a path to freedom. The pieces were forming. The words she had seen carved into the cellar, river, safe, weren't random. They were directions. But there was still something missing. What had happened to the first Amara? Why had her story ended in silence? The hidden diary one evening, while going through a box labeled Recovered Artifacts 1930s Excavation, Amara found something wrapped in faded cloth, a small, leather-bound book. The pages were fragile, and the handwriting slanted, hurried, as if written in secret. The first line stopped her breath. "My name is Amara, and tonight I will run." Amara felt tears sting her eyes. She was holding her ancestors' words, her voice frozen in time. She began reading. The diary told the story of a woman born into slavery on the Whitmore estate. Despite the cruelty surrounding her, she had learned to read in secret, taught by Eleanor Whitmore herself, who had grown disillusioned with her family's cruelty. The two women, bound by compassion and defiance, began helping enslaved people escape through the tunnels by the river. For months, they guided families under moonlight, leaving coded messages carved into tree trunks. But on one fateful night, everything went wrong. The final entry read, "They found us. Eleanor was caught. I ran to the river carrying the children. I heard the dogs, the shouting, but I did not stop. If these words are found, know that I did not die in vain." The river remembers. Amara's hands trembled. The last page was stained, maybe with mud, maybe with blood. Dr. Morgan watched her silently. "You found her voice," she said softly. "Now you must decide what to do with it." Home tremors. When Amara returned home, her grandmother was sitting by the window, humming a song Amara didn't recognize. "Grandma," she said. "I found her diary." Miss Evelyn's eyes snapped open, fear flashing across her face. "You what?" "She wrote everything. About the escapes, about Eleanor Whitmore, about the river. She wasn't just a slave. She was a hero." Her grandmother's lips trembled. "Child, you don't understand. Those stories bring attention. Attention brings danger. People don't like when the truth shifts power. But how can we hide her anymore?" Amara asked. "All my life I thought our name was small, ordinary. But she made it sacred." Miss Evelyn looked away. "You sound like your mother." Amara froze. "My mother?" She tried to tell the story too, years ago before she passed, but she never finished. For the first time, Amara saw her grandmother's fear not as anger, but as grief. Generations had been taught to stay quiet, to survive. But Amara wanted to do more than survive. She wanted to honor the vision by the river. The next weekend, Amara convinced Dr. Morgan to visit the Whitmore plantation site again. This time, the sun was setting as they arrived, gold light spilling across the ruins. They followed the same path Amara and Leah had taken before. But this time, Amara carried the diary. As she read aloud from its pages, the wind began to stir. "We run by stars and silence. The river will guide us home. As her voice echoed, something began to shimmer near the far bank, a faint, ghostly glow. Dr. Morgan gasped. The outline of several figures appeared in the mist, women, children, and at the front, the woman in white Amara had seen before, her ancestor. She held the tag over her heart. "I found your words," she whispered. The figure turned her head slowly toward her, and though the distance was vast, Amara could swear she saw her smile. The river rippled once, then went still. The glow faded, leaving only silence. Dr. Morgan whispered, "You've made contact." "That doesn't happen to just anyone." Amara felt calm. She wanted to be remembered. "That's all," breaking the silence. The following week, Amara presented her findings at a school heritage fair. She set up a display titled, "The Lost Amara, the Woman Who Freed Others." Her classmates stared in awe as she recounted the discovery. Photographs of the tag, copies of the diary, and sketches of the tunnels filled her board. But not everyone was supportive. During her presentation, one student's parent, Mr. Whitmore, a descendant of the original estate owners, interrupted her speech. "This is slander," he barked. "My ancestors were honorable people. You're fabricating lies." The room fell silent. Amara's voice trembled at first, but then steadied. "Maybe they were honorable to their own," she said. "But history isn't always comfortable. Sometimes it's painful. But that's what makes it truth." The crowd erupted in applause. Her grandmother watched from the back of the hall, tears glistening in her eyes. The story that traveled news spread quickly. A local journalist who attended the fair wrote an article titled, "Teen Discovers Lost Diary of 19th Century Freedom Hero." The museum launched a new exhibit, The River That Remembers, dedicated entirely to the first Amara's story. Visitors came from across the country. One day, Amara stood quietly in front of the glass case displaying the original slave tag. Dr. Morgan approached, her expression warm. "You've given her more than a name," she said. "You've given her immortality." Amara smiled faintly. "It's strange. I used to hate my name. Now it feels like a crown." Dr. Morgan placed a hand on her shoulder. "Names carry power, child, especially the ones they tried to erase." A few months later, on the anniversary of the original Amara's final escape, the museum organized a lantern ceremony by the Ashley River. Hundreds gathered: students, historians, descendants, families. Each lantern carried a name, one for every soul that had vanished into silence. When it was Amara's turn, she knelt by the water's edge, her grandmother beside her. She whispered softly, "For you, Amara, for the river that remembered." As she placed her lantern into the water, a breeze swept across the surface, and for just a moment, the reflection of a woman in white appeared beside her. The lantern drifted gently downstream, joining hundreds of others that lit the river like a trail of stars. The Legacy Lives months turned into years. Amara's story spread across news outlets and academic journals. The diary was digitized, and the Whitmore plantation site was turned into a heritage memorial. When Amara graduated high school, she was invited to speak at a historical conference in Washington, D.C. Her speech was simple, but it left the audience in silence. They thought she was forgotten. But history has a heartbeat, and sometimes it beats in us. Full circle. Years later, Amara walked through the museum again, this time as a historian. The exhibit had grown, with visitors standing in reverence before the same glass case where it all began. As she stood there, a little girl tugged on her sleeve. "Miss, are you the girl who found the tag?" Amara smiled. "Yes, sweetheart," the girl beamed. "My mom says you made the ghosts happy." Amara knelt down and said softly, "Not just happy, free." The little girl smiled and ran off. Amara turned back toward the tag, and for a fleeting second, she saw her ancestor's reflection beside her, proud and peaceful. The rain began to fall outside, rhythmic, steady, like fingers tapping on glass. History was no longer buried. It was breathing again. Fame came quickly, and so did the fury. Within days of the newspaper article going viral, Amara's inbox filled with messages. Some praised her courage. Others called her a liar. Online forums debated whether she'd faked the diary, whether a schoolgirl could really rewrite history. Then came the letter, stamped with a gold seal that made her hands tremble. Whitmore Family Legal Division cease and desist all claims attaching the Whitmore name to unlawful historical activity. Failure to comply will result in legal action. Dr. Morgan's jaw tightened when she saw it. They're scared, she said. Scared of losing control over the story they've told for centuries. But Amara's grandmother was terrified for another reason. Baby, she said, clutching Amara's hands, powerful people don't like being embarrassed. They'll come for you. Amara looked at the framed photo of her mother on the wall. Then I'll do what she couldn't. I'll finish it. The confrontation, a public hearing, was arranged by the local historical society to address the controversy. The hall was packed. Journalists, townspeople, descendants of both enslaved families, and the Whitmores themselves. Cameras flashed as Amara took her seat beside Dr. Morgan. At the other table sat Mr. Henry Whitmore III, a sharp-faced man in an immaculate suit. He radiated the kind of polished entitlement that had ruled quietly for generations. He spoke first, voice smooth and cutting. This girl is fabricating history to make herself famous. Our family built that estate with dignity, not deceit. My great-grandmother, Eleanor Whitmore, was a philanthropist, not a traitor, the crowd murmured. Dr. Morgan rose calmly. We have evidence, she said. Artifacts, letters, and a diary written by a woman who bore the same name as Miss Johnson here. Independent labs have verified its age, Mr. Whitmore laughed. Forgery can be made to look old. Don't insult my intelligence. Then Amara stood. Her voice quivered at first, but there was fire behind it. You can question me. You can call me a liar. But the river doesn't lie. The land remembers what you buried. She lifted the diary high. This isn't just my history. It's yours too. And it's time you face it. The audience fell silent. The storm outside, as the debate escalated, dark clouds began to roll over the city. Thunder rumbled low, like a heartbeat beneath the earth. Reporters leaned forward. Dr. Morgan spoke of tunnels and coded carvings, of Eleanor's rebellion and Amara's discovery. Whitmore interrupted again and again, his voice rising. This is madness, he barked. My ancestor would never have helped slaves escape. Amara turned toward him slowly. Then who wrote this? She opened the diary to the last entry and began reading aloud. Her ancestors' words filled the hall, trembling through every wall. I run by stars and silence. Eleanor waits by the river. Tonight we carry freedom in our hands. The room grew cold. A sudden gust of wind blew the papers off the table. Lights flickered. Then, from the back of the hall, a whisper, faint, feminine, sorrowful. Let her speak, the crowd gasped. Amara froze, her pulse pounding. Dr. Morgan's eyes widened. Did you hear that? Another voice, this time stronger. Let her speak. The microphone screeched, lights dimmed, and every phone recording caught the same thing. A soft, echoing voice layered over Amara's own, repeating the same words her ancestor once wrote. The river remembers. The haunting. The power cut out completely. Panic rippled through the hall. Cell phone lights blinked on, throwing everyone's faces into eerie shadow. Then came the sound, the unmistakable rhythm of water. Though they were miles from the river, a faint shimmer began spreading across the wooden floor, as if moonlight were leaking through the cracks. And from that shimmer, a figure began to form. A woman in a tattered white dress, her skin glistening as though covered in mist. Chains hung loosely from her wrists, dissolving into light. Gasps filled the room. Cameras flashed. She turned her gaze toward Amara, gentle, sad, proud. Then her eyes shifted to the Whitmore descendant, who stood paralyzed. Amara whispered, "You see her, don't you?" He shook his head, but tears formed in his eyes. The woman's lips moved soundlessly at first. Then the room heard her voice, carried on invisible wind. Truth cannot drown. The air thickened. The spectral woman lifted her hand toward the ceiling, and every light in the hall blazed back to life. When everyone blinked, she was gone. Only the sound of rushing water lingered, fading slowly. The proof within hours. Clips of the incident flooded social media. Every recording showed the same impossible detail. The ghostly figure standing beside Amara, the floor glowing like river light. Skeptics called it a trick of editing. Scientists tried to explain it as reflection or glitch, but no one could deny what was caught in real time. The headline the next morning read, "Spirit of the Underground, Girl's Discovery Sparks National Reckoning." The museum overflowed with visitors. Historians from across the world reached out to verify her findings. Even skeptics admitted the diary's authenticity was beyond reasonable doubt. The Whitmore estate withdrew its legal threat quietly. The public acknowledgement weeks later, a new ceremony was held at the museum. The governor and leading historians attended. The diary was officially placed under preservation, the exhibit renamed Amara's River, the Hidden Path to Freedom. Amara stood at the podium. Her grandmother sat in the front row, eyes glistening. "For years," Amara began, "our names were carved into things meant to own us, tags, bills, property lists. But today, that same name stands in a museum, remembered with honor. That's what healing looks like." Applause erupted. Cameras flashed. As the lights dimmed for the closing presentation, a projection of the river shimmered across the walls, the same current her ancestor once fled through. And just before the screen faded to black, Amara swore she saw a single figure walking along the water, lantern in hand. After the applause later that night, when the crowd had gone, Amara lingered alone in the exhibit. Moonlight streamed through the skylight, bathing the diary in silver. She opened it one last time. A page she hadn't seen before fluttered open, blank, except for fresh ink glistening faintly, in neat handwriting. "The river remembers. And so do you." Her breath caught. The lights flickered once, then steadied. A warm wind brushed against her cheek. The scent of rain, of river water, of jasmine. She whispered into the empty room, "Thank you." A soft echo answered, "Thank you for listening." Amara smiled, closed the book, and walked out, her reflection merging briefly with that of the woman in white as the door shut behind her. The days after the museum ceremony felt unreal for Amara. News stations camped outside her school gates. Reporters chased her down sidewalks. Even her teachers treated her like a living symbol rather than a student. But when the excitement faded, something deeper began to grow. Not just fame, but awakening. In small towns and cities across the country, people started visiting their local archives, searching old ledgers, uncovering the names of their forgotten ancestors. Schools introduced a new elective, Hidden Histories of the Diaspora, and everywhere she went, Amara saw children, little black boys and girls, standing before museum displays with pride instead of pain. The weight of legacy at home, the rhythm of life slowly returned. But it wasn't the same. Her grandmother now sat by the window with the diary on her lap every evening, reading aloud a few lines before bed, almost as though speaking to someone unseen. One night, she said softly, "Your great-great-grandmother must be so proud. She tried to set her people free. And you set her story free." Amara smiled, her heart warm. "Maybe she was waiting for me." Her grandmother nodded. "We all were, baby. Every one of us who was told to stay quiet, to keep our heads down. We were waiting for you to lift it up." That night, Amara slept peacefully for the first time in months. No ghostly whispers, no nightmares. Only the gentle rhythm of rain, like the sound of waves against a riverbank. A few weeks later, Dr. Morgan invited her on one last trip to the river that her ancestor had crossed 2 centuries ago. They drove for hours through winding back roads until they reached the quiet marshlands. The water glimmered gold under the fading sun, still and sacred. Amara stepped out, the diary tucked under her arm. "This is where she began," Dr. Morgan said. "Or maybe where she ended. History doesn't always tell us which." Amara knelt at the river's edge, fingers brushing the cool surface. "I used to think the past was buried," she whispered. "But it's alive, right here, in every current." Dr. Morgan placed a hand on her shoulder. "It's not just history anymore. Amara, it's heritage." They stood together in silence as the sun dipped below the horizon, a silent tribute to all those who crossed the water before freedom had a name. Months later, the president of the Historical Society invited Amara to speak at a national event marking Heritage Restoration Day. When she walked onto the grand stage, thousands rose to their feet. Among the crowd were elders from her grandmother's generation, many in tears, clutching photos of long-lost relatives. Her speech was simple, heartfelt. History isn't made by those who are remembered. It's made by those who were forgotten, and by those who choose to remember them. Her words spread across the world. Universities quoted her. Museums dedicated wings to the Amara Johnson collection. Her small discovery had become a movement, one that rewrote textbooks and reopened archives long sealed. And through it all, she stayed humble, always returning to her grandmother's porch on Sundays for tea and quiet laughter. The whisper returns one evening while helping the museum curate a new exhibit. Amara found herself alone again in the archives. The janitor had gone home. The lights hummed softly overhead. She opened a shipment box. Inside was an old letter discovered in a Charleston attic. The handwriting was unmistakable. Eleanor Whitmore. Amara's breath caught as she unfolded the fragile paper. If you find this, know that freedom was not a gift, it was a promise. I was not brave enough to live to see it, but perhaps one day a daughter of both our names will. Tears filled Amara's eyes. She traced the ink with trembling fingers, whispering, "You were brave enough. I found you." For a brief second, the air shimmered, that same golden light she'd seen by the river. A whisper, soft and sure, brushed her ear. "You finished what I began." The warmth of those words wrapped around her like sunlight through glass. The return to the river years passed. Amara grew into a historian, a lecturer, and eventually, the youngest curator ever appointed to the National Museum of Heritage. Her mission remained the same, to make sure every child, every name, every forgotten ancestor had a place in the story of the world. One summer, she returned to her hometown, now transformed by her legacy. The local library bore her name. The museum's new exhibit featured the diary, the tag, and the restored letters, displayed beneath a glowing title, "The River Remembers." She walked along the same riverbank where her journey had begun years ago. The air smelled of earth and rain. As she reached the water's edge, a child approached, a little girl no older than 8, holding a school notebook. "Miss Amara," the girl said shyly. "I'm writing about my great-grandma for school." She was a nurse. "My mom says she helped people even when they didn't help her. I want to tell her story too." Amara knelt, smiling gently. "That's how it starts. Tell it loud enough and maybe she'll whisper back," the girl grinned. "You think so? I know so." As the girl skipped away, Amara gazed out over the water, its surface rippling with the evening light. She whispered, "You were right, Grandma. The river doesn't forget." Behind her, the trees swayed softly. The wind carried faint echoes, laughter, footsteps, songs long lost to time. And as the camera pulls back, for cinematic effect, we see Amara standing by the river, her reflection merging with the image of her ancestor in white. The water glows faintly, not hauntingly this time, but peacefully, like memory itself made visible. Her voice narrates softly, "When history goes silent, listen to the wind." Because sometimes, the past is just waiting for someone brave enough to say its name. The night was quiet inside the museum. Everyone had left after the grand exhibition opening. Only Amara remained, standing before the glass case that held the small, rusted slave tag, the one that had changed her life. The engraving shimmered faintly under the soft lights. "Whitmore, AJ." She pressed her hand against the glass, whispering, "I know now what your letters mean. You were never just property. You were power." Behind her, the echo of footsteps filled the empty hall, but no one was there. A familiar, gentle warmth brushed her cheek and she smiled. For the first time, she wasn't afraid of what lingered unseen. She understood. Some spirits didn't haunt, they guarded. A week later, Amara returned to her grandmother's porch. The sun was sinking low, painting the neighborhood gold. Children laughed in the distance. The smell of collard greens drifted from a nearby house. Her grandmother sat in her rocking chair, the old diary open in her lap. She looked up and smiled. "You did it, baby," she said softly. "You gave our people their name back." Amara knelt beside her, holding her hand. "No, Grandma. She gave me mine," the old woman chuckled. "Maybe it's the same thing." They sat together in silence as the sky turned orange and purple, two generations bound by the same story, one that had crossed oceans and centuries just to find its ending. Months later, Amara received an envelope with the museum's seal. Inside was a request. They wanted her to write the inscription for the permanent exhibit dedicated to the Whitmore line. She sat at her desk that night, pen trembling slightly. Then she began to write. "History is not a chain, it's a circle. Every name forgotten still waits to be spoken. Every wound buried still waits to be healed. This story belongs not to one family, but to all who dared to survive." She signed it simply. Amara Johnson, descendant of the unforgotten. 10 years passed. Amara became a historian, traveling the world to uncover stories that time had silenced. But she never forgot where it started, in that small museum, on that one school trip, with one name. She returned often to that exhibit. Sometimes she found flowers or letters from strangers placed by the glass case. Thank you notes from others who had found courage to search their own roots. One read, "Because of you, I found my great-grandfather's story. Now I know where I come from." Each note made her cry, not from sadness, but from pride. The chain of memory was no longer broken. On a quiet spring afternoon, Amara walked by the river, the same one her ancestor had once crossed, running toward freedom. She stopped at the edge, feeling the breeze against her skin. The diary, now worn and fragile, rested in her hands. She whispered, "It's time." Opening the pages, she tore one gently, the first one, the one that said, "For whoever finds my name." She let it fall into the water. The paper drifted, spinning slowly as it was carried away by the current. For a moment, the sunlight hit it just right, and the faint outline of a woman's reflection shimmered above the surface, smiling back at her. Amara whispered, tears in her eyes. "Thank you, Eleanor. You gave me my beginning." The wind stirred, carrying her words down the river. As the camera pulls back, the scene widens. The river glows golden, stretching endlessly toward the horizon. Children's laughter echoes faintly in the distance, and Amara walks away, the sun setting behind her, strong, peaceful, no longer searching. The past doesn't chain us, it connects us. When we speak the names they try to erase, we don't just honor history. We heal it.